do. I don't need to sign, even if I had to choose. You know I'd rather be with no one else but you. One day you will find I'm gonna make it true. And if you don't believe, then we can see defeat for me is inconceivable. But all I think about is what's achievable, despite it might be feasible. Can't stop a man from dreaming. I don't wanna waste this feeling. Excuse the way I'm being. Putting it on a plate, wrapping it up in a bowl. Yeah, I ain't complicated. I got the way to go to get to you. You got to know it. I know wherever you're going. Then I found you're not meant for me. I'm gonna make a tour. I don't need to sign, even if I had to choose. You know I'd rather be.
Is this thing on? Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And I want to say Yama, hello to everyone in my Uluru language. So can I get a Yama back, please? Thank you. For those of you who don't know, my name is Kirsty Parker and I'm your MC for today. I'm filling in for our Executive Director of Aboriginal Affairs and Reconciliation, Nerida Saunders, who sends her apologies and her best wishes for this important day. Before making formal introductions, I want to say Ghana Miana, Ghana Yurta Nudlu Tumbandi. I acknowledge Ghana people and Ghana country. I honour Ghana ancestors, current and future generations, their enduring connection, custodianship and care for this country, and their generosity in sharing it with us. I humbly invite Robert Taylor to the stage to welcome us here to Ghana country.
Nyanki Namiana, Namani, Maninabuni, Yalukuyata, Tandanyanga, Ghanayata, Nyanyari Robert Kari Karamu Taylor, Nyanarindari Naranga, Kumagana Miana, Maninyalu Tampindi Ghana Miana, Kumanalupani Tanga, Nimberendi, Tapandalo Bukiana, Burkana, Kumagana Mianiela, Nayakandalia Yungandalia, Nachalya. My dear brothers, my dear sisters, are you good? Yes, we're good. Did you understand all that? Not even a little bit of it? No? Well, my name's Robert Taylor. I represent 3 different Aboriginal groups, the Ngarrindjeri from down on the Coorong, the Naranga from the York Peninsula, and the Ghana people that have been the traditional owners of this place here. We now call Adelaide, yeah? Adelaide, yeah? Once again, as my uncle always said, it's only been called Adelaide for about 40 seconds in the course of history, yeah? But for thousands of years to the Ghana people, been known as Tandanyanga. Can you pronounce that one? Tandanyanga. And it was actually a Ghana man named Milawita Burka that showed Colonel Light this place here many years ago. And he said, this is our special place between the hills and the sea, beautiful flat plains. This place here, the River Torres, behind us, once beautiful Garawirapari, the Red Gum River. There's a spiritual place down here. This place here where we meet today at Adelaide Oval used to be a place of many ceremonies for the Ghana people. So it's with great pleasure on behalf of my Ghana elders and ancestors, past and present, that I'd like to welcome you here today and acknowledge that this is the traditional land of the Ghana people. I'm now going to sing a song for you. It's a blessing song, a Mani Taula Bukiana song. It's where we call on the good spirits of our ancestors to come here, join us all here today, make this a special occasion for all of us, bring that good energy into the room for us. This one here, Mani Taula Bukiana. Bukiana! Nyalokumina derapanga kuma Bukiana Mina Jiyara dirapanga. Nyalukumina dirapanga kuma. So as I mentioned in that song there, I called upon the good spirits of our ancestors to come here, bless this land and bless each and one of you here today. All right, I'd like to now pay my respects to this instrument here, the humble didgeridoo, yeah? The didgeridoo doesn't actually come from down in this part of this country. Many of you may know this, may not. It comes from up the top of the Northern Territory in a place called Arnhem Land, and its traditional owners are the Yolngu people. So it's very important that I say Magmak Yolngu for sharing this instrument with us, and that's saying thank you in their language. Of course, it's become a big icon for Aboriginal people all throughout our country, sharing our songs and our music, so we like to incorporate it down here as much as we can in our dances. Of course, it's only been called a didgeridoo once again for about 40 seconds in the course of history, but for thousands of years, been known as yidaki. Can you say that one? Yidaki. Now, it's up to your own imagination, the sounds that you do through this instrument. I've been getting out to a few schools lately, and I had one student put their hand up, and they said, "Can you do Justin Bieber?" And I was in flying form, I was in a good mood with this young fella, so I had a go at it, that baby, 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 through the didgeridoo. And I tell you what, I'll never do it again. I learnt my lesson the hard way there. I'm glad there was only primary school students, but I'll never do it again. So it is up to our own imagination, the sounds that we do through this instrument. I like to do the traditional sounds of the animals. As I mentioned before, Garawirapari, the River Torres, the Red Gum River that we have behind us, many years ago it was much more narrower, and there was fresh water running through there, drinkable fresh water running through there. So as I mentioned about Adelaide, the dreaming place of the big red kangaroo, Tarrandanyanga is named after Tarranda, the big red kangaroo. So if we could picture a nice big red kangaroo hopping along for a drink of water down here, it might sound something like this. Where you find a mummy kangaroo, quite often there'll be baby Joey. Another animal that I like to do is that big flightless bird that we have in our country, the emu, we call the emu kari. Can you say that one? Kari. Now that emu makes a bit of a grunting sound. Now, there's a predator out there that likes to eat kangaroos and emus, and that's that wild dog, the dingo. In Kaurna language, as I mentioned, I'm only speaking, of course, to you today about the Kaurna language, but in our country there's over 250 different Aboriginal language groups still surviving today, so there's many Aboriginal languages out there, not just one. But in Kaurna language, we call that wild dog, the dingo, we call him Gudli. Can you say that one? Gudli. There's going to be a piece of paper handed around to all the tables later on where you're going to be tested on this, and you'll have to hand it back in, all right? So Gudli, the wild dog, the dingo, he doesn't bark like other dogs, he howls something like a wolf. That's when all the kangaroos will take off running then, when they hear that. Of course, finding it all amusing is that little bird that sits up in the gum tree, the kookaburra. He laughs at all the kangaroos and emus running away from the dingo. We call that kookaburra, we call him nungana in Kaurna language. Can you say that one? Nungana. So that kookaburra having a good old laugh at the kangaroos running away from the dingo. I go camping quite a bit. You fellas go camping much? Yeah? I go camping quite a bit up in the riverland and that. But every morning when I'm up there, there's always been this kookaburra. No matter where I camp along the river, along my country, this little kookaburra must follow me. He must know I'm there. And every morning about 6 o'clock in the morning, 5:30, he's up there in the tree waking me up, yeah? So next time when I go up there, I said to my daughters, you know what I'm going to do? Do you know what Dad's going to do? They said, what? I said, I'm going to take my boomerang next time I go up there into the tent camping. In Kaurna language, we call the boomerang wadna. Can you say that one? So when I go camping in a couple of weeks up in the riverland, I hope that little kookaburra's up there because I'm going to take my boomerang. And when I hear him laughing early in the morning, I'm going to chuck my wadna at him. Got him. Yeah? All right, ladies and gentlemen, once again, my name's Robert Taylor. I'm here today on behalf of Kumakau Dance Group. It's a pleasure to come out here and welcome you all to country. So thanks for having me, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your morning. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robert. We're honoured by your presence. and I suspect we're very lucky to get you because of NAIDOC Week this week, and I'm sure you've got lots of other business to take care of. Essentially you honour us by welcoming us. Thank you very much. And thanks for the Ghana word for the boomerang, because this fan, which has been donated to me by Melissa's out there, I'm not going to embarrass her by mentioning her first name, but she saw that I was fanning with my paper and she offered me this, and she thinks it's a boomerang, a waddler, but it's not. I'm just going to make myself scarce at the end of today's function. So thank you very much for that gift. Ladies, gentlemen, aunties, uncles and friends all, welcome to this important event focusing on the Uluru Statement of the Heart, brought to you by the Department of the Premier and Cabinet and IPA SA. And also a very big welcome to those joining us virtually today. We thank you for tuning in, and I'm informed that we have an audience, including everyone in the room and 350 plus people online, that we've got about 600 people at today's event, so it is fantastic to have such a great big crowd. I'm the acting... Wonderful, thank you. Such is the interest in the Uluru Statement, and if I ever needed an indication of that, when I was fanging it here because my printer at home didn't work, so I had to go via Officeworks at the last minute, and I had to send them an email, and they said, yes, we can print all of your speech notes. And the young woman that served me said afterwards, do you mind me asking what this is about? Is there something big happening today? And I said, there certainly is. There's this wonderful event about the Uluru Statement from the Heart. And I'm the MC, and as you can see, I'm in a bit of a rush. And she said, well, I've just done Aboriginal studies and I've spent some time in the Northern Territory, and I'm a big supporter of the Uluru Statement of the Heart, so best wishes for today. So I so appreciated it. It was just the right omen to hear this morning. And I'm going to drop by on the way home and tell her the link for this event, because it will be available online at the IPA SA website. As I mentioned, I'm the acting executive director for NERIDA of Aboriginal Affairs and Reconciliation at DPC. I'm also a Uwalari woman from northwestern New South Wales, a long-time director of Reconciliation Australia, 10 years plus, and also I happen to be a very proud signatory to the Uluru Statement as well. I want to start by wishing you all happy NAIDOC Week 2020. As you know, or I think you all know, this annual commemoration and celebration of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and histories, including our struggles and protest, our cultures and our achievements, was deferred this year from its usual timing of the first week in July due to the current pandemic. But we are here now, and we are proud as always. The theme of NAIDOC Week 2020 is Always Was, Always Will Be, which recognises that the very first human footprints on this continent were those belonging to First Nations peoples. In the words of the National NAIDOC Committee, it is about seeing, hearing and learning the First Nations' 65,000 plus year history of this country, which is Australian history. We want all Australians to celebrate that we have the oldest continuing cultures on the planet and to recognise that our sovereignty was never ceded. I want to thank you. I want to thank our impressive speakers, Professor Megan Davis, and I'm just going to look for a sign that we're all good, and we do have Megan online and queued. That's wonderful. And thank you for your patience too, especially to the people online who I think were getting a blank screen, but we're all kind of getting used to technological issues, and I'm glad that we're here and back on deck. So Professor Megan Davis, David Brown, Kim Cheetah, Aaron Hazelbane and Jim McDowell. And I was going to acknowledge that Kim Cheetah was having a board meeting downstairs and that he'd join us shortly, but I saw Kim come in, so welcome to you, Kim. I was starting to worry that your board meeting might go over. But more about all of these fine people shortly. I want to say thanks to IPA SA and also my DPC colleagues who've worked together to deliver today's event. We acknowledge IPA's major partners, the State Government of South Australia's Senior Management Council, PwC and Flinders University. We also acknowledge IPA's professional members and councillors, chief executives from the state government and representatives from PwC and Flinders University. Now you may be aware that we had hoped to have the actual Uluru Statement canvas, and if you're lucky enough to have seen it before, it's absolutely magnificent. We were hoping to have it in the room with us today, and this national treasure was to have accompanied Professor Megan Davis to our event, but COVID-19 put paid to that because Professor Davis lives in a COVID hotspot in Sydney, so she was unable to gain permission to come into our beautiful state. She'll be joining us by video stream, and I know that you'll appreciate, and I was sending texts to Megan saying, hey, can we get a courier to come and pick it up? Can we get it on a plane? And then it just sunk in that this is a national treasure and it's way too precious to have put on a plane by itself. So thank you for your understanding on that. However, everyone in the room will have received on the table in front of you a printed copy of the Uluru Statement, and these have been generously provided by Reconciliation South Australia, and I thank them, and I also acknowledge Reconciliation SA's Executive Director Shona Reid, who has also joined us today. Thank you, Shona. For those of you joining us virtually, you will have received a PDF copy of the statement, and I know that Rec SA wouldn't mind if you said, hey, I'd actually like to have a physical version of it as well. I'm getting a thumbs up from Shona, so thank you. Now, just a few housekeeping items. We ask that you turn your mobile phones to silent. There are toilets in the building. I used some out there. There may be some out that way, but please follow the signs. If there is an emergency and we need to evacuate, please follow Adelaide Oval staff as they lead you outside. We're doing contact tracing, not contract tracing as I've stumbled in the past. And if you haven't already done so upon entering the room, can you please scan the barcode on your tables that will enable that to happen. At morning tea, please visit the IPA SA Membership Hub to explore the benefits of IPA SA professional membership. And if you're watching online, please visit the IPA SA website and explore the membership options there. Whether you're here with us today face-to-face or joining us virtually, we want you to get involved in this event. Today, we're inviting you to share your favourite moments and thoughts from this event through Twitter using a couple of hashtags. The first is hashtag Uluru Statement. The second is hashtag IPA SA. At the end of the event, we will be selecting our favourite tweet to receive a copy of Finding the Heart of the Nation by Thomas Mayer. It's an absolutely gorgeous book which describes the spirit of struggle and change for a better Australia captured in the journey of the Uluru Statement. And for those in the room, we welcome you to conscientiously take photos and video and share them over Twitter, and to deepen your engagement with conversation about the statement beyond NAIDOC Week. If you are our lucky winner of this book, you will be notified after the event by IPA SA, unless the winner happens to be in the room, in which case I think we'll be able to let you know straight away. And lastly, if you drove here and parked today, discounted parking is available if you validate your ticket. There's a little machine, I think it's got a green light on it over on the bar. So not free, but there's a discount. So who doesn't like a discount? So, housekeeping out of the way. During the panel session, we will be answering some questions on Slido. So during the event, we're asking people to submit any questions you have for the speakers. So we've got some predetermined questions, but we want to hear what you guys want to know about. So to do this, just checking here, please follow the instructions on the screen. Are they there? I just can't see them. They are there. Oh, wonderful. You can submit your questions by scanning the QR code with your smartphones or tablets, or by entering www.slido.com into your web browser and entering the code TO46, and that applies for people that are watching online as well. So let's get started. We are delighted to have here as our keynote speaker, Professor Megan Davis. I'm thinking that she's online, but can you please make her feel welcome? She's got an extraordinarily long CV, but I'll have a crack at summarising the most salient parts for today. So Professor Davis is a cobble woman from Queensland. She's the Pro-Vice-Chancellor, Indigenous and Balnaves Chair in Constitutional Law at the University of New South Wales. She's currently an Acting Commissioner of the New South Wales Land and Environment Court and an expert member of the United Nations Human Rights Council's Expert Mechanism on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Professor Davis is formerly chair and expert member of the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues from 2011 to 2016. She was a member of the Referendum Council and the expert panel on recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in the Constitution. She is a Fellow of the Australian Academy of Law and the Australian Academy of Social Sciences and a Commissioner on the Australian Rugby League Commission. Professor Davis supports the North Queensland Cowboys and the Queensland Maroons, and despite her preference for rugby league over AFL, the true code, by Army's code, she's also an old and very dear friend of mine. Now, just before Professor Davis speaks, I'd like to take the opportunity to play you a recording of her reading the Uluru Statement from the heart on the floor of the First Nations Convention on the 26th of May 2017. We're just going to play you the audio. Feel free to close your eyes, but we'll also have a loop of some photos from that event, from my personal library, no less. So thank you.
The Uluru Statement from the Heart. We, gathered here at the 2017 National Constitutional Convention, coming from all points of the southern sky, make this statement from the heart. Our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander tribes were the first sovereign nations of the Australian continent and its adjacent islands, and possessed it under our own laws and customs. This our ancestors did, according to the reckoning of our culture from the creation, according to the common law from time immemorial, and according to science more than 60,000 years ago. This sovereignty is a spiritual notion. The ancestral tie between the land, or Mother Nature, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who were born therefrom remain attached thereto and must one day return thither to be united with our ancestors. This link is the basis of the ownership of the soil, or better, of sovereignty. It has never been ceded or extinguished, and coexists with the sovereignty of the Crown. How could it be otherwise? That peoples possessed a land for 60 millennia and this sacred link disappears from world history in merely the last 200 years? With substantive constitutional change and structural reform, we believe this ancient sovereignty can shine through as a fuller expression of Australia's nationhood. Proportionally, we are the most incarcerated people on the planet. We are not an innately criminal people. Our children are alien from their families at unprecedented rates. This cannot be because we have no love for them. And our youth languish in detention in obscene numbers. They should be our hope for the future. These dimensions of our crisis tell plainly the structural nature of our problem. This is the torment of our powerlessness. We seek constitutional reforms to empower our people and take a rightful place in our own country. When we have power over our destiny, our children will flourish. They will walk in two worlds, and their culture will be a gift to their country. We call for the establishment of a First Nations voice enshrined in the Constitution. Makarrata is the culmination of our agenda, the coming together after a struggle. It captures our aspirations for a fair and truthful relationship with the people of Australia and a better future for our children based on justice and self-determination. We seek a Makarrata Commission to supervise a process of agreement making between governments and First Nations and truth-telling about our history. In 1967, we were counted. In 2017, we seek to be heard. We leave base camp and start our trek across this vast country, and we invite you to walk with us in a movement of the Australian people for a better future.
free to join the applause. Thank you very much, and every time I hear that I get goosebumps, and I'm sure so do many people, especially other people that are in the room, including, as I know, Aaron Hazelbane, who's one of our speakers today. So thank you very much. I'm going to hand you over, fingers crossed, via technology, to Professor Megan Davis.
I hope this is working. I've been delivering a lot of Zoom speeches this year, but generally nothing goes wrong. So hopefully this will be fine. Thank you to Kirsty for that generous introduction. And as a Cobble Aboriginal woman from southwest Queensland, I just wanted to acknowledge the welcome to country. And thank you for welcoming me on your country, and I pay my respects to you and your people and your elders past and present. And happy NAIDOC Day to everybody, or NAIDOC Week, another thing that we've had to adjust to in terms of COVID, but it's wonderful that we have the opportunity to still celebrate it. And as Kirsty referred to, I was meant to be in Adelaide with the painting, and I was of course I was going to the state of origin first, and I put in my form to the police commissioner to come, and I was the only NRL board member that was forbidden from travelling, because I live in a COVID hotspot apparently. In Randwick, so I couldn't come, which was devastating because Queensland, of course, beat New South Wales, and I'm a Queenslander, and we take these things far too seriously. But I wish I had been there to see the slaughter, but sadly that wasn't to be. So instead, I'm going to talk to you not about State of Origin, but about the Uluru Statement from the heart, and I hope to come to Adelaide with the painting once everything is safe again, and hopefully Reconciliation South Australia will partner with me and the Uluru Dialogues out of the Indigenous Law Centre at UNSW to make that happen, so we can bring the painting over, and maybe we can have drinks and a yarn about Uluru. So today, in my kind of allocated 25 minutes, I'm going to talk about the Uluru Statement from the heart. I might leave some of the really technical complexities of it to the panel afterwards, and I'm just going to talk about what the Uluru Statement is generally, where it's come from, and what does it mean. Many of you may or may not know that I was a member of the Referendum Council, and I have been a constitutional lawyer involved in this process for 2 decades. I've been working on constitutional recognition as a when I was a young academic and lawyer, but now this process has aged me tremendously. But I designed the dialogue process that engaged the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community on constitutional recognition. So I wanted to talk about why the dialogues were needed, how were they conducted, what is voice treaty truth, and then really talk to what's where we are now, and then we'll obviously have the panel after morning tea, and I'll try and stick to time, kind of, Kirsty. So just to begin with, recognition, constitutional recognition, has really been a project in Australia, mandated and supported by the Australian government at a Commonwealth level for about 10 years. So it's been about 10 years that we've been in this process of eliciting what constitutional recognition might mean in terms of the actual amendment of the Australian Constitution's text to recognise First Nations peoples. And so it's had multi-party support for a decade and a bit longer before that. But we've seen about 5 federal processes now, including expert panels and referendum councils and parliamentary committees and independent reviews, 5 of them in 10 years, and 8 reports in 10 years. So it's a lot of work in one area of public policy. And a lot of that has culminated with this issuing of the Uluru Statement from the Heart and a very substantive kind of platform of reform for the nation in terms of addressing what is the original grievance, really, what Patrick Dodson famously called unfinished business. But that the reality is this has not been addressed, and that really drives at the heart of the Uluru Statement from the Heart. I suppose I'd start by saying one of the problematic issues of the past 10 years has been the language of recognition. Recognition is actually a really complex legal and political term because it can mean multiple things. It can mean symbolism, but it also means substantive concrete reforms, so substantive reform to power relations. One of the problems we've had in the past among debates in our own community is people don't like the word recognition because the dictionary meaning of recognition is actually acknowledgement. And in the absence of any substantive model, it is fair enough that people assume that recognition is symbolism, but it is far from that. And a very important role, I think, of the Referendum Council was settling that point. And we saw the outcome of Uluru that First Nations who participated in the process all rejected symbolism as an option on the table. That's a really important message for the nation that has been lost, actually, post Uluru by a number of journalists and commentators. It was rejected outright, symbolism. What we did do, though, is find a form of recognition that, at least for this sample of our community, supported constitutional recognition and what they thought was meaningful recognition. So this process really did begin in 2011 with Julia Gillard's expert panel. But prior to that, we had John Howard commit to constitutional recognition in a symbolic form in the lead up to the election, I think 3 days out of the election with Kevin Rudd. And prior to that, recognition had reared its head in 1999 with the preamble and John Howard's proposal to insert a preamble into the Australian Constitution involved significant amount of acknowledgement. So it was a symbolic form of constitutional recognition that did include a singular line about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and their place in Australia. Of course, the language he used was rejected by all of the land councils and ATSIC, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Commission. He went ahead with that language anyway, but it's an important point, 2 points. One, symbolism failed there in that referendum, but also number 2, he was prepared to go to a referendum with language and wording that our people did not support. And that's a really key thing for us when thinking about why the Referendum Council was set up. But so we had this kind of public discussion in Australia in the early part of 2012, 13, 14, 15, where people spoke about recognition, but there was no substantive model. So what you actually saw was a kind of pushback, a backlash from our community about constitutional recognition. People didn't want constitutional recognition if it wasn't going to make a difference to our people's lives. And the evidence, the empirical evidence that exists, that a symbolic statement in the Constitution can elicit significant change in terms of outcomes, in terms of a disadvantage in closing the gap, that evidence is not there. There is no evidence anywhere in the world to suggest that a symbolic statement in a constitution is going to close the gap in terms of health, is going to close the gap in terms of educational housing. And we did that research. Lowicha did really great research on this too. Years ago, National Congress of Australia's First Peoples, many entities did that research to show that a preamble is not going to elicit any change. And I think if it doesn't elicit change, then the rule became post-Uluru, if it's the status quo, then it's not worth pursuing. So, to turn things around in about 2015, about mid this decade, a number of us met with Prime Minister Turnbull, or Prime Minister Abbott to start off with, to say, look, we've lost control of this process. Our people don't support constitutional recognition. And that was at a time in which the politicians in Canberra had come to a kind of gentleman's agreement about recognition. And that is to say, the insertion of a statement of recognition, a symbolic form of recognition in the Constitution, and maybe some constitutional housekeeping. That is to say, deletion of Section 25 in the Constitution, which is a dead letter provision that no longer exists, but purports to give the states power to pass discriminatory franchise laws. Also, the moderation of the race power, or the deletion of the race power, or replacement of the race power with a new head of power. Again, the change is likely to be the same as the status quo. There is nobody that can guarantee that any changed race power would prevent the federal parliament from passing discriminatory laws, and the statement of recognition. So we had a problem. We had a big problem, because we didn't want the nation moving to a referendum with the to be recognised rejecting that form of recognition. It would have been absolutely disastrous for the nation. But there was a problem in that politicians are spoken to by politicians' advisors and elites from any particular community, and so they were not hearing this backlash. They were being told that the silent majority of Aboriginal people supported symbolism, and we obviously discovered that that is not the case. So that meeting with Abbott, I'm sure I can say that Kirsty Parker, as the chair of the National Congress of Australia's First Peoples at the time, myself, Noel Pearson and Patrick Dodson, we went and saw Tony Abbott. We explained the situation, and he agreed to set up another process that would finalise the form of recognition that allowed us to go out to communities and consult, because the expert panel hadn't consulted. As an expert panel, they had chosen as experts the reforms that were put to the Australian population in that process. And I know that because I was a part of that panel who chose those options, but we did not do a deliberative process that involved Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people choosing what they want as a form of recognition. So we know that Abbott, in that revolving door period of prime ministers, Abbott left office, and Malcolm Turnbull took his place. And Malcolm Turnbull pretty much immediately set up the Referendum Council. But prior to this setting up of the Referendum Council at the end of the year, there was what is known as the Kirribilli meeting in the middle of 2015. And it was at the Kirribilli meeting where the government and Prime Minister and Cabinet invited 40 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander leaders from across Australia who issued a statement called the Kirribilli Statement. And the statement was very clear in 2015 that any reform to the Australian Constitution must involve substantive changes, that any reform to the Australian Constitution must lay the foundation for the fair treatment of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples into the future. And so this Kirribilli Statement drew a line in the sand. It said in 2015, 2 years before the Uluru Statement, that a minimalist approach to constitutional change that provides preambular recognition, that removes Section 25, and that moderates the race power does not go far enough and would not be acceptable to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. And that's an important statement that was issued in 2015 and is often forgotten, particularly in the early post-Uluru Statement period where politicians were saying, where did this come from? It was unexpected, but it wasn't unexpected. It was in the Kirribilli Statement that was handed to Bill Shorten and the government in mid-2015. One thing the Kirribilli Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander leaders did do was insist that there needed to be a dialogue, an ongoing dialogue, an engagement with Aboriginal people on what the proposed question would be. So really that was the motivation for the Referendum Council. And to his credit, Malcolm Turnbull did set that up, as I said. And so we set to work on designing dialogues. So we decided that this was a very difficult time to be going out to our communities to ask them about constitutional reform. There was already a huge backlash against the Recognise campaign and the Neon R, and so it was very difficult at that point to engage the community who felt left behind by these campaigns that they didn't see reflect their issues. So we were also just in the kind of early stages of the Indigenous Advancement Strategy, and it was a difficult time to go out and consult. So we decided to spend a year consulting our communities first about what the dialogue structure would look like the following year. So we did a lot of preparation and sought a lot of advice from communities about how we would engage our people in a discussion about constitutional recognition. So there's a really important point to be made here about treaty and voice, which was the primary reform that got up. Treaty has always been an aspiration of our people for constitutional, structural, little c constitutional recognition, and treaty is a form of constitutional recognition in a small c sense. But treaty doesn't require constitutional enshrinement, which explains why treaty comes second after the main priority, which is the voice. It was decided by everybody in the process that we weren't going to waste the opportunity of constitutional recognition by just dumping this process and dumping the opportunity for recognition and just putting your hopes and all your eggs in the basket of a treaty. And certainly at a Commonwealth level, there is absolutely no indication that a treaty process is a viable one in the near future, even if there are state and territory-based ones. So there was a pragmatic decision that constitutional recognition provides an opportunity for our people to get something. And so that was the approach we took as we developed a structured deliberative dialogue process that we would take out to communities. And it was a process, a dialogue process. We used the word dialogue because it came from the Kirribilli meeting. But all of the research that we looked at in terms of constitutional reform around the world showed that citizen deliberative processes are really effective in informing people about the options on the table and allowing them to have an informed decision. So we developed a really tightly structured intensive civics program and a program for the assessment of legal options for reform. And the options for reform were given to us by the Prime Minister and Opposition Leader, and they were based on the expert panel and the Federal Parliament's Joint Select Parliamentary Committee. So nothing that we took out to these dialogues wasn't something that the government and the opposition didn't agree to, because they did. So we obviously we weren't given a lot of money to run the dialogue, so we had to run it through a sample of First Nations people. But it needed to be a robust sample. So we designed the dialogues in a way that we would be able to have a robust sample at the end of that process. And that involved every single dialogue running exactly the same way, capping the numbers at 100 so that we were able to have enough advisors, constitutional lawyers, and local Aboriginal leaders to manage those conversations. So there were a lot of things that we did to make sure that this sample would be robust. The other thing that we did was ensure that 60% of the invitations to the dialogues were privileged for traditional owners, because we really wanted the cultural authority of country to underpin the decision making. And the last thing that the dialogues did was militate against groupthink. We didn't want people to come in with campaigns for particular things that they've been fighting for years. We needed to break groupthink to allow people to come to an informed decision on their own. And so that meant that the findings of the Broome dialogue were not then shown to the Dubbo dialogue. The same with the Hobart dialogue. So we kept back all of the records of meetings, which everybody would sign off on at the end of a dialogue. And we ran the structured process in a way that we would break up different positions to ensure that the process wasn't being gamed from one dialogue to the next, but that it actually was the contemplation of a particular geographical place. It was really that group contemplating recognition in the context of their region, and their people and their country, and that it wasn't something that was some big national pan-Aboriginal campaign for whatever. And that was really critical for the dialogues. So the first process was we sought permission from as many traditional owners and peaks and leaders as possible. So we ran meetings in Broome and Thursday Island and Melbourne. We did a trial dialogue at Melbourne University, where we ran the entire dialogue process and brought in the Aboriginal leaders who would lead the dialogues in their regions. We banned all facilitators and facilitation because it had to be local people running them. And that's how we managed the Uluru Dialogues. We engaged the Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies, IAPSIS, and they ran and delivered the logistics. So they engaged the local land councils, who would then decide who the invitation list was and bring on board the local working group leaders who would then lead that process. So we tried really hard to make sure that it was as ground up as possible, and that apart from the structure of the invitation list, that we weren't imposing too much on that process. So we ran a series of 12 dialogues around the country, Hobart, Broome, Dubbo, Darwin, Perth, Sydney and Melbourne, Cairns, Ross River, Adelaide, Brisbane, Thursday Island and Canberra. And then there was a National Constitutional Convention held at Uluru. That was on the 23rd to the 26th of May 2017. And what's really important to know about the Uluru Statement and the meeting at Uluru was it wasn't to vote on anything. It was to endorse what was done in the dialogues. So that was a really critical thing, that when you got to Uluru, people just couldn't swan in from all parts of the country and undo what was done in the regional dialogues. It was really important that those men and women and young people who had participated in those dialogues, that their decision-making was upheld at Uluru. And so that was what was done. People read out the record of meetings at Uluru, and then we collated all of the prioritisation of the law reforms, and the voice to Parliament was the unanimous option for constitutional recognition. So just to kind of wrap that up, because, well, I can talk forever, but also, Kirsty, I forgot to time my speech, so you might want to text me when you want me to wrap up. We say this dialogue process was completely unprecedented in the nation's history. It was the first time that a national constitutional convention was convened with and for our First Peoples on the Australian Constitution. It's not dissimilar to the really excellent work, for example, that's been done in Canada when they've engaged First Nations peoples on big constitutional reforms. We say we had a robust proportion of delegates who participated in our population of approximately 600,000 people nationally. And it's really the most proportionally significant consultation process that's ever been undertaken. We used a lot of the work of the Constitutional Centenary Foundation framework that had been tested on Australian schools and local communities and local governments during the 1990s. So we didn't just take a model from overseas and transplant it. We did use a lot of the material that had been found from those dialogues that had been held across Australia, which enhanced the civics knowledge of Australians and educated them on federation. But the key characteristics I just wanted to touch on before moving on of the First Nations regional dialogues were impartiality, accessibility of relevant information, open and constructive dialogue, and mutually agreed, owned, and outcomes. So on impartiality, nobody was allowed to get up and grandstand on any particular agenda. We did not allow people who already have a voice in the room. And partly because some of the early meetings, we noticed the way in which significant Aboriginal leaders in the struggle changed the tenor of a meeting. So we banned significant leaders. We banned the National Congress of Australia's First Peoples. when I say ban, they could rock up and sit down the back, but they weren't allowed to participate, and they weren't allowed to get up and give a spiel about, you know, why the institution was so great. The Australian Human Rights Commission, as I said, Reconciliation Australia, any organisation that has a voice, the Aboriginal Labor politicians, we banned everybody because we felt like this was a place for the voiceless, the people that don't have the fancy access cards who go to Canberra regularly to lobby politicians. It had to be people that don't get to have a say when public servants, etc., come around consulting with communities. That was really important to us. So that impartiality was really critical, including lawyers. So I'll put myself to one side. Lawyers were banned from the process. We found in the trial dialogues that lawyers, can be know-it-alls. So they were kicked out because what you learned in 1975 or 1980 or 1990 about Section 5126 might not be relevant today. So lawyers were kicked out, except for me. Accessibility of relevant information. So we really worked hard, especially Arnie Pat Anderson led this work at getting ANU linguists and the Alice Springs interpreters and many different organisations to translate our information into Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander languages. And also we had a lot of interpreters at our dialogue. So the Ross River dialogue, we went in a week early. We did our presentations to the interpreters, and they worked out ways in which we could modify our presentation to use different language, to use images and symbols. And the 2-hour law lecture that we normally give at all the dialogues became 6 hours at Ross River. And in fact, the outcome of Ross River was extraordinary. It was a very, people deeply understood the constitutional reform and the connection to Chukupa and their own law, and it was a very rich dialogue. So open and constructive dialogue was really the third principle I mentioned. I raised that because we aren't a community where everybody agrees. I think everybody accepts that. So it was really important that the dialogue operated from the perspective that there will be disagreement and tension. And the whole purpose of the way the plenaries and the working groups operated was to cross-fertilise different opinions and perspectives, but absorb the tensions and the disagreements and have them front and centre and work through them as a group. And that's why at the end, the final principle is mutually agreed and owned outcomes. We have all the records of meetings, which everybody who participated in the dialogues signed off on. But I don't think there is a single person who didn't sign off on them because it captured everything, the agreement and the disagreement. So that was the deliberative decision-making process that then followed an identical structure right across the regions, putting those voices up front. And then when we got to Uluru, what was key is that those people's voices were heard and respected, and that people didn't just come in and overturn it, and a different kind of outcome was put on the table. So Kirsty's given me a 10-minute nod, which I suspect is actually 5 minutes because she sent it a while ago. So I said I would talk a bit about the process and then talk about the reform, which is what I'm going to do now, and just dovetail it to my conclusion about where we are now. So the reform is crudely or popularly known as Voice Treaty Truth, but if we're just reflecting on the if that was Kirsty saying that was 5 minutes ago. If we just reflect on the constitutional element, then we're talking about a constitutionally enshrined voice to Parliament. And there's a lot of material around today about what that might look like. There wasn't as much in 2017. And partly, I guess, because a bit like the race power or the non-discrimination clause that the expert panel came up with, these things are never really well ventilated in a public space until it gets to the business end of a reform. And so there's a lot of esoteric kind of academic papers around about these things, but less in the public domain. And in the referendum council, there's a nod to what the voice to Parliament might look like. This is how I would explain it. So we took out 2 additional options to the expert panel options and the variations that the Joint Select Parliamentary Committee came up with, although they're kind of just, they're just variations on the expert panel. There's nothing significant. We asked to take out agreement making, and that was because at the time Victoria had an agreement-making process, and South Australia had was going through a kind of treaty process, or early days of one. So they agreed to agreement making, and the second option was this notion of a voice to Parliament. Now, the voice to Parliament is a really kind of common mechanism around the world. We used in our lectures for all of the dialogues, but our discussions about the voice to Parliament really drew upon a lot of the work of the expert mechanism on the rights of Indigenous peoples at the United Nations, who'd spent a decade collating the ways in which Western liberal democracies have accommodated the Indigenous voice within the framework of the democratic state. So when you think about the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which is absolutely about self-determination and what that looks like within the framework of the state, how do you give autonomy to Aboriginal people within the framework of the democratic state? And the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples gives you a nod to how to do that, including Articles 18 and 19 of the Declaration, which set out political participation processes and institutions that states should consider when they're thinking about how to improve the participation of Indigenous peoples within the democratic framework. So that's the really key thing about the voice to Parliament. We traversed about 50 countries that have different ways of accommodating voice. We don't do it very well because voice is always filtered through post-ATSIC, through bureaucracy. And what that means is the bureaucracy talks to peak bodies, and peaks kind of play this role. But the number one group that First Nations people said in dialogues do not represent their voice were peak bodies. And that was a really important message for constitutional lawyers like me, because it's a red flag that people really feel like their voice isn't being heard. It's not being heard through the ballot box because of the small kind of number of which we constitute in the nation, but also because it is Indigenous issues. But also it was a very strong feeling right across the country that peak bodies don't represent the voice of Aboriginal people at the ground. I know the language of grassroots is controversial, but that's the language people used. So the option they came up with, they did support or prioritise the voice to Parliament, but what they came up with was a solution to the race power embedded in that. And it was a solution that no constitutional lawyer had come up with prior to the dialogues, which speaks to the creativity that can happen when you engage citizens and deliberate with citizens on really important reforms that will affect their lives. So the groups discussed how the voice, apart from empowering people that don't normally have a voice, and it's key to remember that people felt it needed to be a First Nations voice, so not an ATSIC model that elects an individual who represents an electorate, but it would be a process in which an individual would represent their First Nation. So it's still a collective model, but you're there on behalf of your nation. And that might work in regional ways, and people might be a large enough nation to just represent that nation. But what was really critical was that First Nations collectively had that voice. And one of the key things that came out in those discussions was two-way accountability. So it wasn't just about the accountability of the state to blackfellas, it was also the accountability of us to our nation, meaning they also, in the dialogue, spoke about recall mechanisms. So if your representative isn't coming back to country and explaining to people what you're doing in Canberra, then they could get a certain threshold of signatures, recall you and have a new election for a new representative. So it's really important, the kinds of accountability issues that were discussed in the dialogue. So I'm just going to wrap up those reforms because Kirsty's actually getting angry at me now. Jokes, Kirsty. So the groups discussed that the voice would operate as a front-end political limit on the Parliament's power to pass laws that affect Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So that would mean the voice is engaged for anything passed under 5126, the race power, and 122, the plenary's power for the territories. And while the mob appreciated that this model would not guarantee that these powers would not be used against them in future in an adverse way, it does create a limit through political empowerment, which would hopefully lead to better designed policies in the future. So the voice to Parliament is a really fascinating reform that came out of this process. The second option, and I really am wrapping up here, Voice Treaty was a Makarrata Commission. So a commission that would be set up by the Voice to supervise agreement making. So it was very clear from the dialogues that not everybody is ready to enter into a treaty negotiation. People were acutely aware of the power imbalance between the states, or the Commonwealth and First Nations peoples. In some areas of the country, treaty was really popular, but in other areas where there are big native title agreements and a lot of agreement making, there was a lot of fatigue. So the Broome dialogue ranked treaty last. So it's really important to keep in mind the kind of geopolitical kind of makeup of our people when understanding that treaty is a complex thing. It's very hard to negotiate when you have nothing, when you don't have the resources, but also it was very clear in the discussions that native title had had a negative detrimental impact upon a lot of communities, and people felt there needed to be healing and dispute resolution between families before they could even contemplate entering into negotiations with the state. So the final option was truth-telling. I can talk about that on the panel. Truth-telling we didn't get permission to take out, but we couldn't begin the dialogues at every single place that we went without Mob wanting to talk for a day on truth-telling and Australian history. And that was quite an extraordinary privilege to be in those rooms and listen to people talk about truth and the importance of truth as being the foundation for us moving ahead with these reforms. So that is the Uluru Statement from the heart, voice, treaty and truth. The process really that we're in now is that while Malcolm Turnbull said no, a few weeks later he did put it into a joint select committee. That committee focused on the Uluru Statement and the reforms. That joint select committee handed down their report and said that despite Canberra, the fact that Canberra wants symbolism, they can see symbolism was off the table and that the only viable option was a voice to Parliament, and they recommended that the voice was designed first before you have a referendum. Not necessarily legislated first, but designed first. And the Prime Minister said before lockdown in the Closing the Gap speech that he will look at the form of the voice before after Ken's consultation period, which he has been doing for the bulk of the year with a number of committees, and is about to do a consultation over December, January, February with communities, which is a difficult period to consult. And then after that, we will come back and hopefully the Australian community will have made its views very clear that they want an enshrined voice, which is very different to just legislating a voice under the race power. But I'll leave that to the panel because I love Kirsty very much as a friend and I think I'm stretching the friendship. So I'll end there.
Thank you very much, Professor Davis. I don't often call her Professor Davis, it's usually Megan or Megs, but thank you so much. And I'm sorry that we don't actually have hours because I'm sure that we could fill them, especially with the questions that I'm sure will come from the audience. And also, as you say, we will have an opportunity during the panel discussion to continue hearing from Professor Davis. But her words have reminded me how intense the journey and what a big journey this has been. And Megan, she hides a light under a bushel, but her unique insights into this are really a gift, obviously, to everyone that's listening to today's discussion. I also want to say, I don't know if Megan can hear this, but I think our Police Commissioner might be watching online, so he will have heard your comments about the fact that you weren't allowed into the state, at least to watch the rugby league and to come again today. Now, we're going to pause for some morning tea. Apologies to the people that are watching. I hope you've got something tasty to snack on. We've got some snacks in the room. Necessarily, we're going to truncate morning tea a little bit. We're going to only spend 20 minutes or so. And I'm just asking people to maybe come back even 5 minutes before that just to make sure that you don't miss anything. As well as refuelling during the break, don't forget to add your vote for questions on Slido, and for our online guests, stay engaged on our socials. And also a friendly reminder that IPA staff will be ready for any inquiries you have about membership or any others at the membership hub. And if you're watching online, please visit the IPA SA website and explore our membership options there. So, back in 20 minutes. Thanks, everyone.
You know, my leave, I got one trick on my sleeve. Yeah, these peoples are making it. I was hoping to see so good. My mind, I got one thing on my mind. Yeah, these things keep taking time. The process is see you could be my contemplation, complication. Cause nothing's changing in my conversation. Yeah, you could be my fantasy, vision. Changing places with reality. She said, you so same. I hope I never change. I won't believe you're leaving me. God knows I'll be ashamed. You know, that's true. These people keep making it so much harder to see. It's just me, got that soul piece to piece. Spots and ooh, you're breaking them. I'm still hoping to see you could be my contemplation, complication. Cause nothing's changing in my conversation. Yeah, yeah, you could be my fantasy, vision, changing places with reality. She said, you so same. Changing places with reality. She said, you so same. I hope I never change. I won't believe you're leaving me. God knows I'll be ashamed. You so same. I hope I never change. You don't even gotta believe it, but she own it. What I want, and I can only hope I got a minute to see if she got it, but I don't. She don't need no favors. Gone places, she can't take me, and I can't face this. She only put the second aside. I was guessing I was less than mine. I meant to check out my call, but you let me go. I just wanna get to know. Tell me if you get me though, and hit me on my telephone. She only had a message from me. I was guessing it was easy to see. You get was open, it was easy to see. You get the best of me, especially when we're left alone. I guess that's why it's pain to me, 'cause I can't do this on my own. She's the one that I need. I can't help it. You got to believe. You got all that I need, honey. She's the one that I need. I can't help it. You got to believe. You got all that I need.
It's never relevant because those parts will raise me too. So I'm not gonna like throw it away, throw it out the trash. I'm gonna put it part of like that's my stepping stone. You see what I'm saying? Man, you guys, and I ain't got to tell y'all nothing, man. Y'all got it all. Y'all got it mad, like they say, hang and all that. Keep doing it, man.
I just wanna say the photo record. I don't wanna ever miss a second. Be a Joe Beckon or Cole, I recognize I could be a better guy. I could be a better guy. Found out you got your face long, that could be relatable. If I knew the right thing to say, I say it every day. You could get it anyhow. I hope you're feeling better now. You want a coffee and tea? We're just chill, watch an episode. I fall over just to make you feel like you own. Alright, take off my shoes, 'cause like I just slowly won't stand up on my own. If only you could take a step in these lines. I can't rest till you realize. I just wanna say the photo record. I don't wanna ever miss a second. Be a Joe Beckon or Cole, I recognize I could be a better guy. I just wanna say the photo record. I don't wanna miss another second. Be a Joe Beckon Cole, I could just listen. I could just listen. That you could see the persistence of my inflation that's missing. I miss the boat by a distance or so. Then I found you. You were meant for me. I wanna make a tour. I don't need sign, even if I had to choose. You know I'd rather be with no one else but you. One day you arrive, I'm gonna make it true. And if you don't believe, then we can see defeat for me is inconceivable. But all I think about is what's achievable, despite it might be feasible. Can't stop a man from dreaming. I don't wanna waste this feeling. Excuse the way I'm being. Putting it on a plate, wrapping it up in a bowl. Yeah, I get complicated. I got a way to go to get to you. You got to know it. I go wherever you're going. Then I found you. You were meant for me. I'm gonna make a tour. I don't need sign, even if I had to choose. You know I'd rather be with no one else but you. One day you arrive, I'm gonna make it true. You were meant for me. I'm gonna make a tour. I don't need sign, even if I had to choose. You know I'd rather be with no one else but you. One day you arrive, I'm gonna make it true.
That's lovely. What's your name?
See you everywhere. I can't shut my eyes, and I still see you there. The more you're distant, the more my mood could switch. What's mine is yours, but which is which? If you were drowning, I'd build a bridge with the best foundations. Cause I'm your pitch, gotta seize a moment so I can see today. Carpe diem or whatever they say. One day the feeling blows away. You gotta see it in a different way. Don't you get too close to me. I can't see what's asked, but I can't fall too fast. The more of you I see, the more I know my history. I can't change the past, but I can make us last. Sitting on my own, when will you be home? Love is not for you'll be home. I've been up all night. You get down the phone. Ever since you've gone, that just don't sit right. Sitting on my own. When will you be home? I've been up all night. You could do no wrong. Ever since you've gone, and that just don't sit right.
Nobody like you. Nobody like you. There's nobody like you. Nobody like you. There's nobody like you.
I ain't never seen a girl so drop dead, look like I seen a ghost. And if she the bird, I go coast to coast to be a world. She don't need us, between us, she does look good in Adidas. But she top of the pole, she's so hot, I'm stop dropping the roll. Don't wanna forget, God give us some time, it's only one of a kind. Now it's so close to tell her the truth, what I would do with my time if I could spend it with you. I wish cause she's so lush, she might just see me crush it. Who knows, here goes nothing. I don't wanna bug, but you're all that I need. And I don't need just tonight. I got you to see, you can take if you like. She's walking my way, I think I know what to say. Got a feeling I was falling for you anyway. Hey, what's it take for me to do to get to somebody like you? You don't need a compromise. I got a message for you. I wanna know you tonight. I'd let you sleep until noon. You're one of a kind. There ain't nobody like you. I got us a place I wanted to take you to. Don't want it mistaken, I wanna shake it with you. But you so lush, you might just see me crush it. Who knows, here goes nothing. I don't wanna bug, but you're all that I need. And I don't need just tonight. I got you to see, you can take if you like. She's walking my way, I think I know what to say. Got a feeling I was falling for you anyway. Hey, what's it take for me to do to get to somebody like you? You don't need a compromise. I got a message for you. I wanna know you tonight. I'd let you sleep until noon. You're one of a kind. There ain't nobody like you.
There's nobody like you. Nobody like you. There's nobody like you. There's nobody like you.
What's it take for me to do to get to somebody like you? You don't need a compromise. I got a message for you. I wanna know you tonight. I'd let you sleep until noon. You're one of a kind. I got message for you. Wanna know you tonight. I'd let you sleep until noon. You're one of a kind. Got a message for you. Wanna know you tonight. I'd let you sleep until noon. You're one of a kind. There ain't nobody like you.
There's nobody like you. Nobody like you. There's nobody like you. There's nobody like you. There's nobody like you. Nobody like you. There's nobody like you. There's nobody like you.
Seems like the more I know, the less I'm right. Am I sure to sight? Cause you're on your bike and I go bananas, forget my manners. But in fairness, you're out of manners. So take your time and do and have it. This getting cold, so take my jacket there. No mistake, a sense of talent, yeah. All I need to cleanse a palate, it takes a while to find the balance. When you come back, you'll see a palace. But seeing you is out of manners, and I could let you in, so show love.
Hello everyone, we're going to get started if you'd like to take your seats. Thank you. That's why they pay you the big bucks, Jim. Well, thank you everyone for coming back so promptly. And I can verify that it is very hot out there. I just had to duck out to the car for something and now I'm cracking a sweat. Now, before we get on to our panel discussion, we are just going to run through a couple of polls that our colleagues at IPA have set up for us. And I think they may come up on the screen, but at any event, I think that people have already started to vote on the first poll question. And the way this works is we're just going to ask 4 questions and we have to run through them consecutively. So we need to finish on one before we move on to the other one. So the first poll question, I don't know that I need to read it out, but I will. How do you personally regard the aspirations expressed within the Uluru Statement? If you haven't already voted, feel free to do so. But I think everyone can see the results there. I'm a bit blind, so I'm just going to take a quick look over here and then I'll be back. All right, I can't quite see how many people have voted, but I know it was something. But the number of voters, I think, is... There we are, thank you. I'm going to throw to all of you to be my eyes, if that's all right. I need to get my prescription checked, and I won't name the optometrist because that would be like an ad, wouldn't it? So, 90... Tell me what the figure is for A. It's a no-brainer. We should honour the aspirations in the Uluru Statement. 94. Thank you. And the remainder, I think, is B. It's challenging. Or is it C? Other, it's too complicated for this poll. Oh, it's changing. I think we can say that there was an overwhelming response that it is a no-brainer and that we should honour the aspirations in the statement. So the next poll question is, do you think we as Australians know enough about the Uluru Statement? Please make your votes. Well, that's pretty resounding too. Is it 97, 98% for no, we don't? So that just goes to show why events like today are so important. In the break, I was on the phone to Professor Davis, and she promised me that she would in fact bring the canvas to Adelaide and that there will be other opportunities for discussions. And that's just the start, I think, because I agree very vehemently with that response. The next question, the 2008 apology provided considerable impetus for truth-telling. Do you think it helped Australia mature as a nation? If you can place your votes, please. Oh, a little bit of a different result here. And I wonder if it means that people are optimistic, pessimistic or realistic. We'll never know, but that's the result. Thank you, everyone. And the last question is, in your view, where does responsibility, and I know that this is not Reconciliation Week, and Megan and I often have a back and forward because she has been a little bit critical of the reconciliation process, but we're best of friends. In your view, where does responsibility for reconciliation lie? Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, other Australians, or both? Place your votes. All right, so I'm a bit surprised about that response, I have to say, but it is what it is. Overwhelmingly, people have selected A, some for other Australians. Oh no, hang on, both, absolutely, sorry. See, that's how blind I am, so thank you very much. That is the end of our polls. See, I can't effectively, I've blown up my speech notes to 18.5 point so that I can read them with my glasses on, so you can appreciate how difficult that's been for me. So thank you very much, as I said to everyone. For the next 45 to 50 minutes or so, we're going to hear a little bit more from Professor Davis, as well as our other esteemed panellists, who I will introduce now in alphabetical order of their surnames, and I'm probably going to read this very, very fast. Like Megan, all of our speakers are esteemed and have a lot of experience and wisdom under their belts. So, David Brown, at the end of the stage, is the Chief Executive of the SA Department for Correctional Services. His corrections experience spans 2 decades across multiple jurisdictions in both the public and private sectors. David is passionate about building better prison services and implementing strategies that drive down the rate of reoffending. Since first joining DCS in 2009, he has focused, amongst other things, on offender rehabilitation, education and vocational training, and building community partnerships to improve reintegration of offenders back into society once they leave prison. Since about the middle of this year, David has chaired the SA Government Senior Management Council's Aboriginal Affairs Executive Committee. He now co-chairs that committee with the Executive Director of Aboriginal Affairs and Reconciliation, Nerida Saunders. And the committee has working groups that are focused on 4 priority areas that are modelled on the principles of the Closing the Gap National Agreement: overrepresentation in the justice sector, strengthening the community-controlled sector, building capacity in vulnerable families, and economic participation, employment and procurement. Thank you, David. Kim Cheetah is partner Adelaide of PwC Australia and the former managing partner for Adelaide. Originally hailing from Darwin, and I'm glad to hear that because you'll be enjoying the heat today, Kim, even if I'm not. His expertise includes cybersecurity, governance, risk management and internal audit. He has led PwC's reconciliation efforts over the past 5 years, and in that time, PwC and PwC Indigenous Consulting have achieved Elevate RAP status, one of only 19 businesses in Australia to do so. In May last year, PwC joined 13 other leading corporates to formally support the Uluru Statement and to encourage others to join in the national dialogue. Kim now co-chairs PwC's National Reconciliation Governance Group. He's been a leader in Indigenous employment over many years and is an ambassador to the Aboriginal Employment Industry Cluster Program in SA. In 2020, he was recognised as a Distinguished Alumni by Flinders University for his contribution to business in SA and to reconciliation. Turning now to Aaron. Aaron Hazelbane is a Warai and Cook of the Man with strong cultural connections to the Finniss River region in the Northern Territory and the far west coast of South Australia. Aaron is a Senior Aboriginal Policy and Project Officer, Youth Justice within the Department for Human Services. Independent of that role, he is a member of the SA Aboriginal Advisory Council, the SA Government's peak advisory body on matters of Aboriginal affairs, programs and policy. Aaron is a strong advocate for the rights and safety of Aboriginal children and young people and their inherent rights to family, culture and community. Before joining DHS, he was a project and policy officer with the Office of the Commissioner for Aboriginal Children and Young People. While studying law at the University of Adelaide, Aaron worked within the Crown Solicitor's Office and undertook placements in the Office of the Treaty Commission and Department of Child Protection. He was a participant at the First Nations Regional Dialogue here in Adelaide and also a delegate to the First Nations National Constitutional Convention at Uluru. Please welcome our panel. Aaron, Aaron was just asking if I wanted some water, and I do, but I'm going to slug from the bottle while no one's watching. Now, I might say also that we've been recruiting questions on Slido, and we may be able to take those questions throughout the discussion, but we have got a lot to go through, so I apologise in advance if we don't go through everything. So the first question, and I'm going to ask this of all of the panellists, I'm going to start with Aaron. And the question is, why does the Uluru Statement matter, and is there a part of it that speaks to you the most? Or an aspect?
Thanks. I was going to pass off to Kim or David to kick us off, but thanks for the question. Before I dive into that, I'd just like to acknowledge that we meet here today on the lands of the Kaurna people, and I pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and also the many young Aboriginal leaders that are coming up through their ranks. I think it's very important that we acknowledge them in their place, and I pay respects to what I'd consider Aboriginal mentors in the room, colleagues and friends, and I'd like to welcome all of you here as well. I think it's very timely that we gather to talk about the Uluru Statement from the heart. It's been a long time coming. To go to the question, I'll read something to you which I want you to really consider and take that on board. We seek constitutional reforms to empower our people and take a rightful place in our own country. When we have our power over our destiny, our children will flourish. They will walk in two worlds, and their culture will be a gift to their country. That paragraph alone is something that I have, attempted to give, respectful meaning to, because it's such a breath of fresh air for us to step back and think, what type of country are we leaving to Aboriginal youth, who are often and are the most marginalised group in our society? To you Australians, where would we be as a country if we didn't have the songlines, the dreamings, the stories of our Aboriginal people, which are central to our fabric? It is these gifts that only Aboriginal children can share with you, no one else. And I think we need to start appreciating that. As we all know, the Constitution was adopted in 1901, and it paid little or no respect to Aboriginal people. I think the Uluru Statement from the outset set out to put in place a motion of recognition as what we've come to know now as our rightful place in this country. I think about my journey and the future of all children, and that, we're not masters of the future. We don't have the power to control what happens, but we do have the power to control what happens now. I'm quite frank in my approach to this, but it's quite evident that the waves of assimilation have constantly impeded upon our Aboriginality. It's impeded upon Aboriginal nations. And I think that, there's a lot of unfinished business that we need to get to business, to dealing with. And I think that we will be much better off if we do so much quicker than later. I won't go on, there's so much to pack in. And
There is. Is my microphone working? Yes, it is. I'm going to just ask the other panellists to respond to that question as well. But before I do, I just wanted to say that the makeup of the panel is quite intentional. We wanted to have a very diverse range of speakers. So, we have obviously working within government, David. We have Kim working in the corporate sector. Aaron working within government, but obviously being very much part of the Aboriginal community and having been part of the journey of the Uluru Statement as well. So, and I'm hoping that all of the speakers can speak very much from their, work perspectives, but also their personal perspectives. So with that, I might just hand over to David and just ask, why do you think the Uluru Statement matters? Is there a part of it or an aspect of it that speaks particularly to you?
If I just take perspective from the criminal justice sector, as a Chief Executive of the Department for Corrections, it's a good opportunity to reflect on the message in the Uluru Statement. And in all that dialogue that occurred across all of the nations, the length and breadth of Australia up into the Torres Strait, one message came through about Aboriginal Australians being the most incarcerated people in the world. Yet the statement from the are not overly criminal in their makeup. To have all of the social justice issues that impact on Aboriginal people, to have all of those systemic barriers and systemic racism that Aboriginal people deal with every day, to have the overrepresentation in the criminal justice system come through as a deliberate part of the Uluru Statement is a clear message to governments at both a Commonwealth and state and territory level that we need to have a fundamentally different approach to crime and justice in this country when it, with respect to First Nations people.
Thanks very much, David. And Kim.
Thanks, Kirsty. I'd like to start off by acknowledging that this is Kaurna land. Pay my respects to all of the Kaurna people and their elders and their leaders. And for everyone in the audience today, First Nations people have travelled far and wide to recognise all of you in NAIDOC Week. And as part of that is what I think this statement is just so important. What it does is it draws on a voice of First Nations people about their aspirations for this shared country that today we do share. And our future is a shared future. But it can only be a shared future if we have a pathway forward that recognises where we've come from, but also puts in place some mechanisms to address the issues that have occurred over the last 230 years. But I think the things that most talk to me in this statement are the extraordinary resilience and opportunity and aspiration that the statement conveys, and particularly the one that talks to how much richer and deeper this country can be when it recognises that it hasn't been a country existing for 230 years. It's a country that's been here since time immemorial, the longest continuing living culture on the planet. And that's something we should all embrace, understand, and find a way in which we can celebrate and recognise it going forward. There's a lot in the statement that talks to me. There's a lot of really important aspects, and I know we'll get to them, but the one that always resonates most is a movement of the Australian people. And that's in all of our hands. All of the people we know, it's in our hands.
I'll throw to Professor Davis shortly, Kim, but just a follow-up question. There are many social issues that corporates may choose to engage with. And as I mentioned, PwC was one of a number of corporates that formally endorsed the statement last year. Why was it important to PwC to do that?
Look, reconciliation has been something that has been really core, important for PwC for a long time now. One of the things that we did as part of our Reconciliation Action Plan was engage our leadership of our firm in understanding and truth-telling and the importance of reconciliation. But in particular, we took up a number of those leaders to Gama last year. And Gama last year, was just alive with the Uluru Statement from the Heart, with the opportunity and what that represented. And we were able to, engage, have our leaders talk firsthand to people like Aaron who are actually there at Uluru to bring to life why this was so deeply important. And they were profoundly moved. They profoundly understood the responsibility that we have as a large corporate to lend our voice, but also to be part of truth-telling within our own organisation and to help all of our people to better understand. But also, we're the largest professional services firm in Australia. We do a lot of work with government, a lot of work with corporates. And how does voice and the role of Indigenous people and where we do work that impacts Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, how do we think about that differently? So a lot of things wrapped up into that, Kirsty, but it was just, our leadership just said, this is just fundamentally important for Australia's future.
Thank you very much. So now, can I just confirm that we do have Megan with us and Megan can hear us? Give us a wave, Megan. Your little box on the screen, fantastic. Now, obviously, being so crucially involved with the Uluru Statement, Is there a part of it that really gets you in the heart? And why do you think the Uluru Statement matters to Australia as a nation?
Yeah, can I just shout out to Aaron there before I start? He's just one of those incredible young leaders who was so clever and thoughtful, erudite, always a heavy lifter in this space, and we are really super grateful for the contributions he's made, both in Adelaide at the Dialogue, at the National Convention, and since then, because we very much have done this work for people like Aaron and that next generation of young people coming through. Just wanted to acknowledge him. The Uluru Statement. Okay. I'm probably a little bit like Kim in that I feel very strongly that, I'm a constitutional lawyer who studies a constitution that hasn't changed for 40 years and hasn't changed very often in the history of Australia. But I feel very strongly about that component of it, that citizens working together can change power structures, and that movement of the Australian people is something that I think is really powerful because it gives Australians agency, it gives our people agency, and, it was a really clever, I think, decision of our people to go, you know what, we're not going to hand over a pretty painting to be hung on the walls of Parliament House so that they can make it a part of their ritualistic engagement with our powerlessness, but rather decide that we're going to do the heavy work that comes with engaging our fellow Australians on this journey. And Kirsty, I too, was intrigued by the answer to that question about reconciliation, which is partly vindicates my part of our continuing argument for the past couple of decades. Megan wins. About the problems of reconciliation and the way that things have been framed in this country. And so I think this is actually a really important roadmap for Australians and First Nations people to sort this out among ourselves and together say to the politicians, this is the way we need to go, because, reconciliation as a concept, a lot of old people said in the dialogues, it really contemplates that we knew each other before, that you're restoring friendly relations. But the fact is we haven't met each other yet. And that's what Uluru was. And my colleague Galarrwuy Yunupingu on the Referendum Council said, this is us calling out the Australian people to meet us at the Rock. We've got some grievances to tell you about. We want you to meet with us and talk about these grievances. And we're going to tell you what repair looks like to us. Yeah, that's the truth and justice. What did you do wrong? What is the truth? That is the justice element. That's the truth element. The justice element is, what does repair look like to our people? Well, we're saying to the Australian people, repair starts with this voice, enshrining our voice in the Constitution. So we're at the table when they talk about things that affect us, laws and policies. And so that's the part that I really get goosebumps about, that Kim referred to, is the movement of the Australian people for a better future. I think it is the emancipatory potential of liberal democracies, actually. And there's a lot of people that might suggest I'm a Pollyanna, but as a constitutional lawyer, I feel very strongly about the public institutions in robust liberal democracies like ours. And we can do this as a people.
We'll have a fight later about who's winning in this argument, Megan Davis. And I was going to ask you, but you've answered it in your question really about why it was important that the Uluru Statement was issued to the Australian people and not to governments or parliaments. Can you just, and I don't think we've captured it, but you talked about, we don't want the Uluru Canvas or the Uluru Statement to be something that hangs on the wall in Parliament House. What are the intentions for the Uluru Statement in the long term?
The painting or you mean the painting?
Yes.
Yeah, so one of the things was the painting was a kind of afterthought in that we wanted people to focus on the statement, the words, and not get captured by an artefact. I shouldn't use the word artefact, but what I mean is the painting. And we noticed by about the second year, people were just they're really taken by the painting, and I understand why. But then the conversation becomes about its protection and its restoration, and you're standing there going, no, that's the distraction. It is a beautiful painting, and we love the artists, but we've taken the painting out of kind of circulation because we really want the statement to stand on its own. And one of the problems is each time we present these incredible, important law reform contributions, right? This is a big piece of public policy work, a decade, where our people have grappled with a complex federation, complex constitutional arrangements, and have come up with a really clever solution. And we didn't want them to hang this on the wall, which they do so often. And sure enough, straight after Uluru, me, Noel and Auntie Pat go down for Q&A in that great hall. And we start walking out on the stage, and what's sitting there in a Perspex box but all the bark petitions? And everybody was so proud of them. And I'm like, no. That's not a good thing that is in Perspex and you haven't implemented any of it. And so a big part of, I suppose, the painting is important, but a big part of the work that we're trying to do, and I suppose it speaks to the symbolism versus substance, is to get Australians to move away from embracing symbolism. And I could see that playing out in the answer to the apology question. I was very impressed that kind of became a bit tighter, because we're very good at gestures and we're just not that great yet at the big substantive reforms that will empower our people. It's those substantive reforms or redistribution of public power that we actually as a nation haven't tried compared to New Zealand, the US, Canada, etc. So I don't even think that was the question. I don't even think that was an answer to your question. I think I'm just gibbering actually at this point, but hopefully it was worth something.
Not at all, and I'm just going to ask you a complex question to follow up, just to have you on the ropes, because you said you were winning. No, this goes to the content, obviously, of the Uluru Statement, and the asks in the statement that have been encapsulated as voice treaty truth. The sequencing of those asks was quite deliberate, but obviously there's been a bit of discussion in the last little while also about the sequencing of it. Can you tell us why that sequence is important?
Yeah, the sequence is important. Well, first of all, the sequence is important because that is what was endorsed at Uluru. And too often the state comes in and says, oh no, we'll just take the truth part and then walk off, which people started doing straight away. And one of the problems of truth-telling in this country is we're really good at that part. So Kirsty knows this story, and I'm not just doing this because I do have you on the ropes. But reconciliation was a statutory process set up by the Hawke government at the tail end of a process where he could not deliver on national land rights and a treaty. And you can see in the cabinet discussions that Torres released, and I'm happy to send them to you highlighted, Kirsty, that they discuss what do we do now? What do we do now? Because the blacks are going to be furious. They don't get their treaty. What do we do? Big broken promise. And they decide to kick the can down the road into a reconciliation process because they said, as they say every decade, we need to know more about Australian history. Now, that's a kind of crude kind of assessment of that part of history, but nevertheless, the fact is truth is something that we did with the Royal Commission into Aboriginal deaths in custody. It's something we did with bringing them home. We're very good at the truth-telling part, but as I said before, there is a second component to truth, which is justice, truth and justice. They are at the core of reconciliation. The justice part says, what does repair look like to you? And we very rarely implement what Aboriginal people say themselves, not what the state tells us repair looks like. What does repair look like to you? We're not very good at listening. So the first thing with the Uluru Statement is there is a sequence. And even last week we did a seminar on truth-telling, and all of the comments were just like, no, you've got it around the wrong way. Oh, no, you got to do truth first. If you don't do truth, nobody knows. There's there's ample evidence in this country as to what happened. Yeah, the whole Henry Reynolds thesis has been completely disavowed by so many historians. Why weren't we told? You were told. There's colonial parliaments and, you know, post-Federation parliaments who all did inquiries into the massacres and the killings and the protection era, etc. So I just think cherry picking what you like because in your head that's going to fly with the Australian people is part of the problem. It's certainly what politicians do, and I think it's important for people to know that this was a constitutional recognition process. We were asked to go and ask people, what is meaningful recognition to you in the Constitution? The response was a constitutionally enshrined voice to Parliament. So that is the first part of the sequence. Treaty is very complex. Not everybody wanted a treaty. Treaty doesn't have to sit in the Constitution. It can be done in statute, and it will be done in statute in most areas. So treaty is next in the sequence, but our people also discuss the lack of resources that we have to breach the power imbalance that currently exists between us and the state and us and the bureaucracy. Most of us aren't in a position to enter into a treaty process unless they're prepared to do what British Columbia did and give us $50 million to go away and hire our own lawyers and set up our own law firms and start proper negotiations. That's what treaty negotiations look like. And we're not at that point in this country. We might be in 10 years, we might be in 20, but right now there are some really serious problems and we need a voice to mandate or force the Commonwealth to have us at the table on laws and policies that are made about our lives. And I suppose that's what I'd say about the sequence. It's very deliberate, but you just can't pick one out and say, I'm going to run with truth telling, because it makes more sense to me. What it means is that you're not listening.
Thank you very much. I just want to turn back to Aaron and just ask if you can tell us a little bit about how you've championed the Uluru Statement in your own sphere of influence, and also what it would mean to you personally, including as a signatory of the Uluru Statement, to see it realised. Big question, sorry about that.
Yeah.
They're all big questions.
I'll get to that in 1 second. I think I just ought to recognise also that there are 2 other delegates in the room who attended the National Convention as South Australian delegates, and that being April Laurie, the Inaugural Commissioner for Aboriginal Children and Young People. And also Melissa Clark, who is the General Manager for Strategy, Policy and Reporting and Youth Justice. Who's the donator of the fan. For me, it's conveying very passionately that we must have the power to drive and to navigate how we integrate into the future. I think we've got a history of always being so close, things have been at the edge of being successful, but inevitably it always slips away. And that's from my experience growing up in the Northern Territory, where, you grow up hearing about the Burunga Statement. Those are things that you grow up, going to the Burunga Festival, all of those things are in your face. Politics from an early age is what you kind of are exposed to, and it's instilled in you very naturally. I've mentioned, the complexity of Aboriginal people, but we hear it, more profoundly amongst Aboriginal youth about that balancing of what, existing in 2 worlds. And, let's face it, Megan's talked about it. I'm glad that she has. I've probably learnt a lot from Megan in this space. But Aboriginal Australians are the minority. Numbers matter in a democracy. Noel Pearson talks about it as being the mouse and the elephant. Go figure. So I always come back to the point that what sets the Uluru Statement from the heart apart is that it wasn't a gift to Parliament. to be put in Parliament House and wrapped up and, you know, given a fancy name in a glass box. But it was a statement gifted to the people that it's our responsibility, all of us, we have a responsibility to spread the word. And, you know, the very fact that Parliament itself, you know, responded very quickly and failed to, you know, hear and respect the entirety of the statement justifies our need to have a voice. You know, like many Aboriginal elders who have taught me, putting the importance on land, dreamings and stories and sharing this with the nation is a journey for all of us. It's something for all of us to be proud of. And I echo the words of Kim and Megan that it's something that we all need to join, you know, be in unity in addressing. And, you know, some of the figures earlier on in the poll kind of, I must say, you know, raise a bit of concern and stress, because it goes to show that there is a lot more still to be done. And, you know, that's the reality of our circumstances. You know, as others would say to me, pull your socks up and get the job done. Because, you know, it's all of our responsibility. It's too much for the next generation to inherit.
Thank you. So while we're on the issue of spheres of influence, can I turn to yourself, David? And obviously you have a long and possibly expensive, but certainly extensive background in corrections. And now, even the mention of corrections, and I'm sure I'm not going to be telling you something you don't know here, but, you know, it's a very contentious setting for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Can just raise the internal body temperature, even when there is a discussion. And as you quite rightly said, the Uluru Statement does make a reference to us being the most incarcerated people on the planet. How can the aspirations that are contained in the Uluru Statement be realised in a setting like the corrections setting?
I think the most important point to make in response to that question is that if we just focus on the corrections setting, we'll miss the opportunity that the Uluru Statement is really looking for all Australians to focus on. The corrections is the end of a very complex social problem. It starts with disadvantage, it starts with poverty, it starts with a lack of opportunity, it flows through to a policing system that is inherently discriminatory towards Aboriginal people, and it comes into a criminal justice and court process that is designed by everyone in the country except Aboriginal people. And so from a corrections perspective, my objective really is to try and work with my colleagues across government to influence policy, influence legislative reform, to influence program design, and to do so in partnership with Aboriginal people within the Department for Corrections and across the public sector, and with the Aboriginal community more broadly. And those things take time, but if the focus is simply on the fact that we incarcerate 2,500 Aboriginal people per 100,000 adults in South Australia, then without looking at the whole justice system and the whole social structure, then the opportunity to reduce that rate of incarceration, which is now a clear target in the Closing the Gap agreement, which I think is a long overdue inclusion in the Closing the Gap process. But if we just focus on the incarceration end of the spectrum, we're going to really struggle to shift that number down.
And I mentioned in my introduction that you're also co-chairing the SMC's Aboriginal Affairs Executive Committee, so of course you've got a very wide view of what governments can do to actually shift the dial in a way, as you say, that's done in partnership with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as well. And, you know, there are so many things that are in play, and, you know, I've been involved in Aboriginal affairs for a long time, and, you know, probably every 3 or 4 years, it rolls around and people say, often following elections, where people say we're at a watershed moment in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander affairs. We've been at so many watershed moments, and you talked about opportunities, but the opportunities, they don't roll around often enough, and we don't take the advantage of them that we need to do. But I feel like, obviously with the people's movement around the Uluru Statement, the recent signing of the Closing the Gap National Agreement, and everything else that everyone is trying to do in their individual spheres, I feel like we are at a watershed moment. Would you agree with that?
I'm not sure that I'm really in a position to offer an opinion as to whether we're at a watershed moment or not, to be honest. But what we're trying to achieve with the Aboriginal Affairs Executive Committee is a small step towards walking down a different path together. So for the first time in the South Australian Public Service, we have an Aboriginal Affairs Executive Committee which is made up of more than 50% Aboriginal senior public servants across South Australia. We have just 4 priority areas, because in my experience, my observation is as soon as you create an Aboriginal Affairs Executive Committee, then everyone wants to throw everything to do with Aboriginal affairs at that committee. But the SMC made a deliberate decision just to give the committee 4 priority areas of activity, which you mentioned earlier, Kirsty: overrepresentation in the criminal justice system, working to build capacity and support vulnerable families, employment and economic participation, and building and supporting growth of the Aboriginal controlled community organisations. So we have 4 working groups that are going to tackle those policy questions, and each of those working groups are made up of Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal public servants. Those positions on those working groups were filled through an expression of interest process. We had more than 219 expressions of interest across the public sector, close to 60 expressions of interest from Aboriginal public servants. Last week we had our first forum for the working groups to meet and to start to build their work plans. And for the chief executive colleagues in the room, it was a real awakening to the power and the passion and the commitment of Aboriginal public servants across SA. They were all there, enthusiastic, engaged, ready to contribute to meaningful work plans. And it wasn't designed in this way. On reflecting on the Uluru Statement for today, it really dawned on me that what we were trying to achieve was very much part of what the Uluru Statement was about. So it's only the start of the journey. I'd rather have some sort of feedback in a few years' time, and hopefully we're still meeting, we're still progressing work plans and delivering real outcomes.
Thank you very much. And David, of course, notwithstanding all the work that's being done within government, by virtue of all jurisdictional governments signing up to the Closing the Gap agreement, they have agreed to making a fundamental change to the way that governments go about their business, and that is not doing Aboriginal policy, determining solutions and so on without the Aboriginal community. So every single government agency across South Australia and in all the other jurisdictions have now committed to doing things differently in partnership with community-controlled organisations throughout the Aboriginal community, and that is a very big shift as well. We have a couple of questions that have come through, and I might just, we've got heaps of questions to get through, but I might just quickly ask each of the panel, and I might, we'll start with Megan, but the question is, and thank you for sending these through, from Anonymous, what do you believe are the most effective ways that non-Indigenous people can further the aspirations of the Uluru Statement from the heart? So the emphasis here is on non-Indigenous people, and I might go to Professor Davis first.
Thank you. Well, I think one thing is just to keep up to date with, what's happening in the space, because there are times like the consultation process that is coming upon us where we're going to need non-Indigenous Australians to engage in advocacy for an enshrined voice. So to that end, I would urge people to check out the main website of the Uluru Dialogues, the people that participated in the Uluru Dialogues and at the National Convention. And that is the Uluru Statement.org, I believe is, I should know the URL, Uluru Statement.org. And it was set up by a whole heap of lawyers, a whole heap of leaders who straight after Uluru chipped in like $50 each to buy this, buy the domain and just set up a little website that set out the Uluru Statement and about what it is, so we could start educating the Australian people. Now, obviously, 3 years later, it's become bigger than what that little website can sustain, and we've had good philanthropy money in that a new website will be launched on the 25th of January that explains each of the dialogues and who was at it and what was said and the National Convention. But I would go to that website and read the statement and read about our story, which is the Aboriginal story of Australia that was written by all of the dialogues and the truth-telling component of the dialogue, and sign up. You can put an email address in there, and we are now sending out weekly things to our non-Indigenous supporters about things that we're doing and ways that they can support this movement, because we're leading into an election year, and we're really going to ramp up our civic engagement with the Australian people on supporting this. So that's what I would say.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm gesticulating to Renee from IPA to say, how long have we got? Because we're running a little over time, so I'm going to ask people to speak in depth, but with absolute brevity from now on, if you can do that. I just want to go to Kim, and I might just say, if people do go to the website that Megan was referring to, there's a 20-minute video on there that we were considering running, but it was going to take up too much time. I'm glad we didn't. We'd be even later still. But it's a wonderful exploration of the Uluru Statement. I encourage you all to have a look at it. So the question was about what can non-Indigenous people do to advance the aspirations, the Uluru Statement, Kim. And I was going to ask you, how has the PwC's endorsement of the Uluru Statement influenced how you go about your business, and particularly in your engagement with clients? Is it something that you take up or raise or discuss with them?
Yeah, absolutely, and I think it goes to a bit of the commentary that Megan said. The Uluru Statement does call for a voice enshrined in Constitution, but what underpins that really important is the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, which is about voice broadly as well. And so very much one of the areas we've put a lot of attention in is about recognising whenever we're doing anything with our clients or with our people that actually has an impact on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, that we're actually seeking a voice, that we're actually allowing that to be heard, and therefore we're thinking about that and working with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in terms of any of the outcomes that we might do, and encouraging our clients to take exactly that same thought process and mindset as well. And when I reflected on the question about what are effective things that non-Indigenous people might be able to do, and the first thing that came to my mind, which sort of is the balance for voice, which is listen.
Absolutely, thank you. So we're not going to get to every panel member for every question, but I'm just going to quickly turn to, and I think it might be a short answer, perhaps, Megan. The next question was, what's been the progress and development, if any, in regards to the Makarrata Commission?
So, I mean, I think a lot of the focus has been on the design of the voice, which is the formal process that's on at the moment, the voice to Parliament or voice to government, whatever it looks like once we see that paper come out in December. There's been some work on it, or at least discussion on it in the Joint Select Committee paper. The Indigenous Law Centre at UNSW has been doing a fair bit of work on what that design would look like, because we can't just wait for that day when they announce they're ready to go. You need to have some work done on it. And aside from that, we're monitoring the work of the Victorian treaty process, and they're kind of about to commence work on the framework agreement with the state. Northern Territory will take a long time, I think, and it's a territory, so I don't even, you know, I'm not even sure it's really a treaty. So there's work being done in different ways on the Makarrata Commission, but nothing formal in terms of a government kind of process. We had always envisaged that if First Nations peoples occupy the voice to Parliament, that it would be the First Nations and the collective that supervise the consultation with our people as to what a Makarrata Commission looks like and what its function is. And that, you know, I think that work needs to be done because it's important for the legitimacy of institutions that we ensure Article 18 and 19 of the Declaration are upheld in this work, and that is, before you actually design the Makarrata Commission, we have to go out and ask our people what they think it looks like.
Okay, thank you. There was another question, I might just flow it. Flows a little bit from the previous question about what can non-Indigenous people do to advance the Uluru Statement, but there's also a question saying, what's the role of younger Australians, both Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people, carrying this movement through? And I don't want to embarrass you, Aaron, but you are younger than all of us. I'm just wondering if you have a view on that.
I want to put the attention here, I want to shift the attention, because it shouldn't rest solely upon us. Not us, I'm probably above that age bracket now. But, you know, how do institutions and society engage young people? I'm quite fortunate that I work in a space of policy and that I can bring that experience to that area. But, you know, going to the heart of the question, I often say to my friends and, you know, even Aboriginal cousins, you know, why isn't this being talked about? Why is this being preferenced over the other? And I often resort to thinking, you know, I don't want to get caught in a realm that's just of going around in negativities around what's happening with the Uluru Statement from the heart. I think that we need to stop getting distracted with the politics. I think we're easily caught up in what the politics of the day say about our voices, how they respond to us, and we take that on board. I think, you know, it's somewhat become a part of our nature that, you know, that what people say about us is ingrained in how we react to social issues, and it shouldn't be that way. You know, I look at my journey and, you know, I don't want to get distracted from the question, Kirsty, and pull me up at any point. But, you know, NAIDOC Week has always been a bit of a, you know, and it goes to the first poll question, which still leaves me a bit stumped. But it's something that I've, you know, that as an individual, as Aaron, I can't speak for anyone else, that I've grappled with, because accompanying that is the trauma that we experience, you know, the deaths in custody, all of the historical issues that we need to come to the table and discuss in order for us to move forward as a nation. You know, I think I'm an optimist. I think that, you know, that what we've seen from youth in general over the last couple of years around, you know, strikes and their power, you know, their ability to take back power from public institutions is quite, I look at them in anticipation and really look forward to seeing what they are capable of achieving.
All right, now we're just about out of time, and I see our Chief Executive there, who may have other things that he has to go to, but thank you for your understanding, Jim. We did have another question up there. It's gone off. In fact, it's saying time, but I'm just going to keep going on for a tiny bit. Just one thing is to acknowledge that there was a question there, but I'll take it more as a statement. It was from an Aboriginal woman who identified herself, I think, as Sharon, and she said, "I am an older Aboriginal woman who is trapped in a web of grief and trauma." And I will take this as a statement that she hopes that she doesn't die before there is some justice for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. I didn't want to let that question or that comment go unacknowledged because, you know, obviously it's writ large in all of our discussions. My final question, and I'll ask everyone to be very brief about this, is, and, you know, so, you know, we talk about is Australia ready to embrace the Uluru Statement? Well, the Uluru Statement's now 3 years old. We know that people feel that not enough is known about it, so clearly the word has to be spread. But can I just ask each of our panel, just succinctly, to say what you hope it is that Australians will do now with regards to the Uluru Statement, and it might reference your own personal experiences as well. I'll start with you, David.
Start with me. I think there's a greater thirst for knowledge and understanding in the Australian community, and when people answer that question about do people know enough about the Uluru Statement, I think there's always an acknowledgement and a recognition that people may know something about the statement, but they need to know more. And so if we're going to have a voice at all levels of society on Aboriginal affairs and on policy and programs that impact on Aboriginal people, then the Uluru Statement is a great foundation for that conversation to be had.
Thank you. Kim?
Look, I desperately hope that we're ready for it, but I think there are still many challenges. It's a people's movement, but I do think we need more leaders spread across from community leaders to stand up and to engage, and I feel like there's still a lot to be done.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm just getting texts about all kinds of stuff. To you, Aaron?
I've said it, I'm an optimist. I think, without a doubt, in my lifetime, we will see change. It probably, Megan's touched upon it, but I think not, probably, and she can, give me a bit of a call later if she wants, but I think, I want to go to this point that the voice isn't something that is entirely new to Aboriginal people nor Australia. Like, it's not a crazy proposition. Like, let's just come to terms with that before we actually move on to whether or not it's capable of being achieved. Like, it's logical, and I think the statement from the heart really sets out a sophisticated roadmap to how we get there. If we can just adhere to that, then, I'm sure that, the hard work, not only of Megan, Auntie Pat, who have put in tireless hours and, really driven the campaign post the National Convention. I'm kind of getting caught up in my words here, but I think it's completely achievable, and I think if we stay on course, adhere to the roadmap, that we will achieve success.
Thank you. And Megan, you did refer to that in your previous answer as well about what people can do. Just a final question for you. 3 years after the Uluru Statement was issued to the Australian people, what's the journey told you about Australia?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, it's still alive, but it is alive because of a lot of intervention from non-Indigenous Australians from the moment Turnbull dropped it, without any debate or discussion. I think, on some of the caution or hesitation that our colleagues have issued on the I think David and Kim have issued on the panel. Australians vote on less information about tax reform, climate change policy, industry policy in federal and state elections, right? There is plenty of information here for the Australian people. And I don't think, and we've got every former chief judge of the High Court, we've got Justice Haynes come out. This is, as Aaron said, a very modest and conservative change to the Australian Constitution. We need more community leaders stepping up, but I think they are stepping up. I think what you'll see as we get closer, or at least are given the opportunity to go to a referendum, you will see the kind of public debate that is had about things like climate change or, tax cuts, or the many different kinds of policy issues that are ventilated in this country when we lead into a federal election. And that time will come, and we will know at that point how prepared we are for it. But I think there is too much pussyfooting around when it comes to reform, insofar as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in this country. There will be no Pollyanna Day this will never end. Even with constitutional reform, it hasn't ended in Canada. It's an ongoing relationship, but there's a massive power imbalance here, which is why I found the answer to the reconciliation question so strange. There's a huge power imbalance here. We have not acknowledged the wrong. We might have in ad hoc ways, but we haven't as a nation. And then we haven't asked what repair looks like. Well, we did with Uluru, but that is insofar as this constitutional recognition process. But I just want to end with one thing, Christy. Getting your
Oh
name
my
wrong.
God.
And that is, let's not go the kind of incremental baby step approach in 2020. We know that a lot of the bureaucratic changes we make at a federal level and across the Federation is actually just lipstick on a pig. And when I just want to refer to a comment that David made, because you're right, Uluru doesn't belong in corrections. There is nothing you can do in that space that will free our people. But the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody provided a roadmap forward for this as well, and we referred to that a lot in the dialogues. And that is, they said, if you want to protect our people from the criminal justice system, well, these are the things that we can do when you're in custody and when you are in prison and in institutions. This is what we can do to protect your life. But the Royal Commission said the number one thing to protect our people's lives is to keep them completely out of contact with the criminal justice system. And we've failed to do that in the 30 years because we now have the highest incarceration rate in the world. But the Royal Commission said at the heart of that piece of work is the right to self-determination. And there's a powerful recommendation there where they say bureaucrats and bureaucracy have to exit our space. We have to create the space for autonomy for our people to take the wheel, and to drive our own agenda and to self-determine. And that's a key piece of work that's forgotten about in terms of the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody. There is nothing anyone in the criminal justice space, including the ALSs, can do to protect our people, but we can protect them by building a future outside of that space. Yeah, and that's what the Uluru Statement is trying to set up the structural reform to do. And I'll end on that comment, apart from doing quick shout out to April and Melissa, who I didn't know was in the crowd. April and I had a lot of fun in some of the working groups there in the Adelaide Dialogue, and so I just wanted to acknowledge those two as well. Kirsty Parker.
Thank you very much, Megan Davis. How long have we known each other?
Too long.
No, not long enough, but I suspect we'll still be friends after this as well. And thank you very much. As Megan said, there's no time for pussyfooting around things. We actually need to talk truthfully and honestly with each other, even if these things challenge us, because it's only by being honest that we can actually move things forward. It's been a mammoth discussion. We could go on for a very long time. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. So can I please ask everyone to thank all of our panellists, Megan, David, Kim, Aaron, and all of you. Thank you very much, and I can release our panellists. If you're welcome to stay on the stage or take a seat. You might need a sip of water. And I'm going to turn straight away now. And I also just want to say thanks to everyone that asked questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of them. And I too also want to acknowledge April and Melissa. I didn't see you. Well, I saw Melissa and then it fell out of my head that I should have acknowledged you, but also April as signatories to the statement, and thank them for the work that they did with it. Now we're coming to the absolute business end of it, and it is now my pleasure to introduce Jim McDowell, who's been sitting very patiently there. Thank you. Jim is the Chief Executive the Chief Executive of the Department of the Premier and Cabinet, a position he's held since September 2018. In this, Jim supports the Premier and Ministers to deliver the government's vision for South Australia, with a focus on building strong collaborative partnerships across government and with the community and business sectors. He brings broad experience to the role, from growing up in Belfast to working in the private sector in the USA, Korea, Singapore, Hong Kong and Saudi Arabia, where he's held many executive, non-executive and advisory roles. Moving to South Australia in 2001 to establish the Adelaide-based headquarters for BAE Systems Australia. He was previously the Chancellor of the University of SA. He serves on the State Government's Infrastructure South Australia and the Urban Renewal Authority boards. Jim is a current board member at the Adelaide Football Club. the Australian Strategic Policy Institute and St Peter's College. Sadly, and I didn't run this by Jim, but I might as well say it, it's public knowledge anyway, it was announced last week that Jim will shortly step down from his role at DPC at the end of the month to return to the private sector. And so given the no doubt extraordinary demands on his time, we are very lucky to have snaffled him to present a short closing speech for today's event. Jim McDowell.